the tool sets that are available to us mere peons who are not part of the empire, we can now speak and put it onto the internet and people can engage with it. They like it, right? Versus you just have to tune into the radio and Warner Music is telling you what you need to listen to.
People just want to hear like conversations that would normally be behind closed doors happen in public. And if you can just do that, you're going to crush it.
It's all about the style of your business. And we're trying to raise awareness. There's not one way to make $1 million. There's a million ways to make $1 million. And there's also a million ways to finance your company.
Welcome to the In the Pit podcast. I'm your host, Cody Schneider. Today, we're having my friend John G on the show. He's going to share with us how he's grown a B2B business in an extremely competitive space, biotech. He's going to share all the tactical pieces, and it's awesome conversation if you're trying to figure out how to build brand. The show is brought to you by Swell AI. Swell AI is content repurposing powered by AI. Go to swelলাই.com and sign up for free. It's also brought to you by DraftHorse AI. DraftHorse AI is programmatic SEO for blog posts, and it's also brought to you by Landing Cat AI. Landing Cat is programmatic SEO for e-commerce. All right, let's get started with today's show.
John, what's good, brother?
Hey, Cody,
so
what is
have
good? You. Dude, I'm jealous. I see you in paradise right now, and I have like fake paradise.
No, I love it, man. You got a nice little plant collection going on in the back.
Look at him. He hit the top.
No, I love it. No more.
He's like, let me out. Let me out.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Sweet, man. We were just talking. I think it's been like 12 months since we had this initial conversation. I know your company is going crazy. John, just for people that haven't or don't know who you are, running a company called Excedr. What do you guys do? And just talk to me about its origin and give me those 3 bullet points rapid fire so people have some context.
I got you. So I'm John, co-founder, CEO of Excedr. Excedr is a lab equipment leasing company for the life sciences. So basically spun Excedr out of UC Berkeley in 2011 to scratch my own itch. Basically, via the pain points and frictions I was feeling in the lab, particularly around how expensive equipment can be and how much it slows down your research if you don't have it. So we started Excedr to solve that pain point, basically to get equipment into the hands of researchers without breaking the bank so they can get their research done faster and more efficiently.
Totally.
So that is what we've been doing since 2011. So that's like going on 13 years. Basically,
that's crazy, man. I didn't know it was that long. And you work a lot with early stage biotech, like funded companies, right? Is that your core demo? Just to understand it.
Yeah. And I would broaden it a little bit, right? It's almost cool. Like scientific research, just like generally speaking. So it could be biological in nature. It could be chemistry in nature. And it can also be like renewable energy and stuff like that, which can sometimes be more in the realm of physics. But it can be a combination of the 3: biology, chemistry, physics. As long as it's like lab work, we're in there.
Nice. Okay, sweet. No, I think that's great just for to orient this conversation because I want to hit today, if you're cool with it, just talk about you guys have been growing like crazy, which is insane. I want to talk through you texted me the other day with, hey, this company just reached out to us, like they inbounded and it's a top 5 bank type thing, which is nuts. We don't even have to go there. And then the other piece is you do a lot of really interesting finance stuff, which I think for companies, it'll just, and really just founders, it'll be interesting to hear like these different avenues that are available on the financing side. So yeah, man. So give me a recap of the last 6 months because I know it's just been absolutely stupid. So you started this podcast and I've been helping you with it. It's the Biotech Startups podcast. How many downloads a month are you guys doing now?
We're doing like 40,000 monthly downloads and it's like growing exponentially, which is crazy because honestly, for those of you, why would they know who don't know about how we met? When we first started like our kind of journey, and we've always been like a marketing digital first kind of oriented company. So we were doing very much of the traditional digital marketing, like traditional in the sense of stuff that has been going on for the past 10 years. It's your classic SEO, paid advertising, in all the usual kind of like suspects in paid advertising and social media here and there. But we were very focused on those kind of like pillars. And we got introduced because of Sonk. And when you guys met working at your previous gig, and honestly, like I've always been an avid podcast, like listening, but never even really considered starting a podcast, mostly because I'm shy. I don't know. Like I still am shy even after doing the podcast now. People might think I'm like gregarious and extroverted, but I'm actually not really.
Turn it on for the show. Yeah. I don't know. You're such a good host. I hear all of these episodes, right?
But it's different when it's like a one-on-one conversation, right? We were just talking about conferences and AACRs like going on right now. Throw me into a conference, I like freeze up. I'm like, I freeze up because it's like, it's a lot. Anyways, basically the podcast, like we started this like less than a year ago. And basically the goal of the podcast was, again, this is another scratch your own itch moment where it's like a lot of we talk about the sciences that we serve, biology, chemistry, physics, and the combination permutations of those three disciplines. And a lot of the people who are trained in the sciences are not really trained in business and broadly speaking, because why would they be? Like you're in grad school, heads down, trying to crack genetic code. I don't know if you have time to also learn the ins and outs of business unless you're just like not sleeping. And a lot of the time it's like really hard. It's hard to find the educational resources. If you're not rolling in the right circles, you may not be necessarily bumping into people who've been there, done that. So the ethos of the podcast is that we were like, hey, look, we need to democratize this information, demystify it, and really put it in the hands of researchers who need it most so they can go on their 0 to 1, 1 to end journey with a far less like painful process. Because like when I was doing 0 to 1 for Excedr, it was like running through walls every day, which is painful and not fun. And I
think founder can relate to that. That's listening to this, right? Like,
no, that's exactly right. But no one wants to have to run through walls every day. Like I will run through a wall, but hopefully I don't have to do it every day. And if we can shortcut that where we're like, okay, let's tighten this up. Let's like the feedback loop. Let's get all these learnings out into the open so people can incorporate that into their journey, whether it's the scientific one or the business one or whatever it may be. We can make your journey far more efficient, far less painful. And so that was I'm giving this like big wind up right now because that's the ethos of the podcast, is having conversations with people who've been there, done that, have seen ups, downs, up, down, up, down, the roller coaster, and talk about the roller coaster candidly, because oftentimes it's not talking about candidly. It's just usually the materials out there are just like, you're just getting elevator pitches and that doesn't help anyone. So that was the ethos. We started the podcast and basically we didn't have expectations for it, but from the outset, we knew what we wanted to do in the sense that this needed to be authentic. Like it had to be authentic. We're not like, you could probably tell, like when you listen to the podcast, it's just like shooting the shit. It's like the energy is like, we're having a beer after work, catching up on the weekend, just like shooting the shit. And that's the energy that we're going for versus having it overly buttoned up and like overly combed through and manicured and prepared. It's just, let's talk. And that authenticity is really, I'm trying to attribute like why the podcast is going the way it is. But if I had a sneaking suspicion of what is like causing this swell, it's that authenticity and just like candidness that is driving it and people are resonating with it. Because I think people are just tired, frankly. I don't mean to bash ESPN or anything like that. It's just like it's like everything's too prepared. It's too prepared.
It's too fabricated. We're seeing this across all forms of media, right? All people just want to hear like conversations that would normally be behind closed doors happen in public. And if you can just do that, you're going to crush it, right? Because I think there's this, especially in the worlds that we live in with like early stage like companies, like there is so much noise in that space. Like to your point of like, where is the actual meat within all this? And so when you can hear whatever industry experts or domain experts talk about something that they know way more about than anybody else, like that, your audience is, and it's figuring out that content bridge like between who you're trying to sell to and then what are they going to find interesting and then how do I find those people to come on these shows and talk about those things. But I think like YouTube is a great example, right? Like we're seeing this in the data right now. YouTube is like taking over podcasting. People are like, and they're basically just like having it on in the background, which is super interesting. But the bigger like picture thing of this, and you're seeing this in from all the large creators, they're starting to do like way more storytelling, way more almost getting to know the like person. It's like vlogging is back again is another way to say this. And what's great for like founders is podcasting is this really easy way to create this type of media that the world is like desiring at this point within the cycle of content production, content marketing. So
absolutely. And I think too, but here's the thing, right? It always gets back to being authentic and value add. Like
100%.
People are smart. Like people are smart and they'll smell if it smells fishy, they'll veer away from it.
But it shouldn't be that, right? Like this isn't a sales thing. I'm just like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to be like, hey, so you're getting 40,000 downloads a month, right? What has that done to your business from like an inbound lead standpoint and then a partnership standpoint? And I'm not asking that question, right? But that's what's coming from this conversation in contrast to like, here's some pitch on some other thing. What is it actually like? Okay, so you got this thing, you did the hard work. What is happening now to your company now that you've climbed this mountain? And just for context too, for everybody, this isn't the last 9 months this has happened. This isn't even a year yet. And it's already at the point, like you guys are you break the top 10 life science podcasts in the US, like on a monthly basis. I'm trying to think what other things you guys showed me. Like I've seen so much inbound for like guests, like to join the show. Like the last, I think, email we sent out for you guys, it was like 1,900 clicks to the guest, like inbound form, basically. So anyways, tell me about like those types of things, like what's happened company side.
And it's interesting because what ended up happening is, and to get back to something that stands out to me that you said, is the conversations that are typically behind closed doors we're now having them, right, to the service, hopefully to the community. So we're like, these are conversations we've always been having, but we just, again, they're behind closed doors. And we now have started to broadcast it, and people are really starting to, there's a true resonance, like a true like personal resonance with what we do. And we wanted to really, the reason why, like, once we found that resonance and we basically just put gas on it. And now that it's just like folks who, for lack of a better description, who thought we were randoms who've been doing this for 13 years, but we no longer feel random anymore. And oftentimes I don't blame them. Like we're a small company. We've been around, right? Like
your headcount's like 10, 12. Where were you at?
Like 14.
Yeah.
But we're like a small but mighty team. But we punch above our weight, and have been doing it for a really long time. Like we've served like clients not just on their first company, they sell it. We've also backed their second company. So like I've had clients that I work with like have been working with me for 10 plus years. But again, we don't talk about this.
Yeah, totally.
It's behind closed doors.
You're talking to the founder about the business that they're running and the things they would have done differently type of thing.
Exactly. Like again, I'm just like having this one-on-one conversation, never recorded previous to the podcast. Yeah. And I was like, just for example, I can give you an example. Jake Glanville, the first episode, like he's one of them. He was just like, oh, let's just have this chat on the podcast and do what we always talk about, but just put it on the podcast. And that totally resonated. It's just conversations I was already having one-on-one with my colleagues. We're just like, let's just see if people find this valuable. People found it really valuable.
It's just like to your point, like it's customer interviews, but in public. Like that's like kind of what these turn into, which is the craziest part of this thing, right? Exactly. If you're a good early stage founder, like you should be having these conversations already. All you're doing is just recording them and talk. So like Jake, I know you texted me forever ago, and like he raised his next round based off of the episode, right? So it's like people went back, listened to him on the show, and they're like, yo, I want to write you my next check based on like you being on this podcast. Can you talk to me about that? Like that, just share that story, because that to me is just crazy and like a lot of our listeners are founders, so they're trying to figure this out.
Yeah. And I think ultimately what the podcast has done is given, and we've always thought about this as empowering our community. It's less about the Excedr story. It's more about their story, right? And how can we leverage our platform to benefit them? And whether you're a startup founder, whether you're an investor, like the platform, we are always thinking of ways that platform can benefit you. And this is the thing where sometimes it's just like the universe, just like you just get out into the universe and it comes back. You put good out into the universe and it comes back to you.
Totally.
And that's the idea, right? There's no kind of like preconceived notion or just premeditated. This is what we put it out there. We're trying to help those who are on this journey, and every guest, basically, as they share their learn, and basically it gets into the ears of who needs to hear it.
Totally.
Broadly defined, whether that's your next customer, your next partner, your next investor, your next friend. Really, these are real connections being made that would have been two ships in the night, like crossing each other, right?
Totally.
But the pawn now is, instead of crossing, they shine the spotlight on each other. Hey, they connect, they talk, they shoot each other a DM on LinkedIn, and lo and behold, magical things happen.
Totally.
And this is broadly defined. I've made lifelong friends with people who've reached out on the DMs. It's not even like a business thing. And then also, they're also business things too, but it's
from that naturally. You're just in the same space, right? I think that the thing that's always, we talked about this when we first, I was like, yo, you should do this. I think this would be perfect for your industry. But
I was like, I had reservations, by the way.
I know you were like super skeptical. And I think most people are like with this whole thing, because it sounds ridiculous, right? You're like, oh, what are we going to talk about? It's not going to be interesting, this whole thing. But you're at the point where I got a text from you 2 weeks ago and you're like, yeah, I'm getting just inbound DMs from our target IC. They're reaching out to us to try to have a conversation with us. And this is entirely just coming from basically they've listened to the show for the last 6 months. They're now in their next phase where they need equipment, and that's what it turns into. And for you guys, it's like a long-term game where these are huge like ticket purchasing decisions in the range of $250,000, that type of thing. So talk about that. I'm curious your thoughts there.
Yeah, totally. And look, is this car, it's like the universe giving it back to you, right? Look, like equipment leasing is a very specific solution, right? It's like you need equipment. That's what the pain point we're trying to solve. But we want to be helpful above and beyond that, right? So it's like, how can we like level you up in other aspects of your business? And also, you get to know Excedr, how we think about things via the podcast, right? You can, again, we're no longer a random. Even though we're like a random 13 years in the making. But anyways, you now can, at your own pace, you can just tune in, listen, and you can see who's on the other side of this.
Can we go deeper on that? We're not a random anymore. Like when you say that, do you mean like the industry knows that you exist now, or like what has changed in the last 9 months since the beginning of this?
So this is a big part of it. I think it gets back to my like ESPN like commentary. Again, it's just like the traditional media apparatus. Right? The traditional media apparatus, broadly defined, it used to be network television, CNBC, whatever. They would kingmake, right? They kingmake in the sense that they're like, we think this person or entity or whatever initiative deserves, in our eyes, the attention, media attention. So they're kingmaking, right? And now, because of podcasts, the internet, social media, so on and so forth, the tool sets that are available to us mere peons who are not part of the empire, we can now speak and put it onto the internet and people can engage with it. They like it, right? Versus you just have to tune into the radio and Warner Music is telling you what you need to listen to. Right?
Totally. I think to your business, it's so different too, because I don't care. I have this thing, I think about this every week, right? I don't care if 100,000 people listen to this show. If I can get 500 people that are like, my target audience of what I'm doing, that is way more valuable. To your point, like we have 40,000 downloads a month. Like the whole biotech industry now listens to your podcast, right? If you can do that for the next 5 years, like your company is undoubtedly going to grow, right? And that's the difference in what it used to be. And you're just talking like if your target audience is 100,000 people, like you couldn't even hit that with radio previously, but now for some reason you can. Like you can go and be like again in their ears. So
it's like a democratization of it, right? There's been a power shift.
Yeah, barriers have been removed. Totally.
Yeah. Like the power dynamics have shifted, and now us, random, not really random, because like here's where the random commentary comes in, right? The large traditional media apparatus thinks we're random, so we don't get the shine in normal traditional media, right? Because like they're like, there's like bigger fish to fry. There's more
life science media, that type of thing.
Yeah, and look, they do great work, but I'm just saying, I get it. You guys are
totally.
You're looking for, there's like stories that in your eyes check the boxes in terms of like it being notable, and you try to go after those stories, right? And we fall under the wayside because we're smaller, we're very nichey. It's okay, this doesn't have the broad appeal that the traditional media apparatus needs to have. And so we're like, we think these stories, again, these conversations that we're having behind closed doors should be shared so people can learn. Yeah. And that's really it, right? It's like we're putting what we deem in our eyes worthy stories out there. And if people gravitate to it, like exactly like you said, like we had no anticipation or expectation this thing would go the way it went. I would have been like, I think about those numbers in just like actual, they're like, these are people in a room. If there were 100 people in a room listening, I'd call that a win, like a super win. That's like a lot of people. That's not just a number. In our eyes, like the listenership in the community, these are like real people. So I have to pinch myself every time that thing just keeps going. I'm like, holy crap. And it is a little bit nerve wracking because it is a responsibility, like as the platform grows. But we've always held like, we need to put good out into the universe, quality bar really high. And how can we just continue to just push ahead on helping the scientific community run their businesses better? And if it just so happens that you need equipment, you know where to find us. We're just the DM.
It's going to be first thing that comes to the top of mind, right? Because that brand has been like, again, for the last 6 months has provided all this insight to you about your career or the industry, right? So.
Exactly. And another thing too, to get back to the top of the call, you asked about now there's been awareness around creative financing. Because like in our space, the life sciences, is like you raise the biggest venture check as possible. And it's a feast or famine type situation. You raise a massive check or you don't raise a check at all. That's what is presented. However, the stories that we're trying to tell, or my guests are trying to tell, or are telling, they're far more unorthodox. Yes, some of them have raised venture. Some of them have raised a lot of venture. Some have raised a small venture. Some have leased everything, so they didn't have to raise as much venture. They're doing like licensing deals. They're doing contract research to pay the bills via revenue, right? What a concept that you can get your clients to pay you to keep the lights on, right? And I'm not saying one way is the right way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to
It's just different tools.
Tools. Yeah. There's more tools. Like,
it's just finance.
Venture's a hammer, right? And everything starts to look like a nail when you just have a hammer. But that's not the case, right? There are an infinite amount of ways you can run your business stylistically from a business perspective. You can have a Steve Jobs mentality where it's like a top-down thing. Or you can go NVIDIA, where it's like a flat organization where Jensen Huang has 50 direct reports, right? One way is not, it's all about the style of your business. And we're trying to raise awareness to this. There's not one way to make $1 million. There's a million ways to make $1 million. And there's also a million ways you can finance your company.
Totally.
You can do grants, you can do debt, you can do credit, you can do leasing, you can do licensing deals, you can do royalty financing. The sky's the limit. If you just give it a chance and you think about it. And I'm starting to wax philosophic about this, right?
No, this is great, man. And I want to go here way deep too and have like really specific. Before we do that, the last thing I want to touch on the like owned media side is you're getting all this inbound now from like companies that are trying to sponsor the show. Yeah. You talk to me about that. I don't know what you're saying publicly and stuff, but some of the like the texts you send me where it's, I just got this massive corporation basically trying to sponsor it. Talk to me about that and what that's been like.
So it's super interesting. Again, you got to just put value and good out into the universe. It always comes back to that. And you got to have that empathetic, like you have to have that empathy with the listener. And so from our perspective, I was like, I want an ad-free experience. I want this. Let's just keep this just like concentrated value-wise as much as possible. People gravitated to that. Now, we've never it was never the plan. We're not a podcast, right? We're not a media company. Media is just a means to communicate to the audience and to our community as efficiently and as broadly as possible. That's how we've thought about it. We are, like, let me just remind everyone, we are an equipment leasing company for science, like for laboratories. That's what we do. The podcast is a means of like, how do we talk scale to scientists? And you don't have to be a scientist. You can be a business person too. But if you are a participant in the scientific community, we want to talk to you. Or you can listen in and tune in. And right now, the listeners, that it started to ripple, right? And now there are very large organizations who are like, hey, like we really enjoyed this vibe. It's different. It's differentiated. It's authentic. How can we like, and we're very selective, by the way. Like this is not like there's an unnamed big corporation. We'll leave it at that. That is, and we're vetting them. Like this is not just one. There's like multiple parties who are trying to. So we're just being very selective on.
We're talking just like multi-billion market cap companies that you would see talked about daily within financial like times or like financial news orgs. Like these are the types of, and we're just like, oh, this is just like a 40,000 download podcast, right? But if you think about this is what I always get back to. If you think about who's listening to your guys' show, like the amount of capital they have, they're be able to deploy, that is so valuable to like any company. So it's the really the value per listener is like higher than, so, and just to give a contrast, like somebody that listens like to true crime, that the revenue per customer or the revenue per listener you could get out of that is way lower than, I have 40,000 people that listen to this show, but their ability to deploy money is at a way like higher average than what I see on these traditional shows. So everybody's obsessing, like I see this in YouTube, like space in particular a lot right now, where they're like obsessing over like view count. Like I actually don't want that to happen. Like I want like fewer, but people that have higher like revenues or higher net worth or whatever that ends up being, that value metric that you're measuring them on, to be, that's the person that I want to be listening to the show. And like, how do I optimize for that? And I think that you guys have done this really well. And like these companies that are inbounding that are like, yo, how do we get ads on your show?
Yeah.
That's a testament to that.
Yeah. And I think I think this is a kind of a thing of the internet. Like the internet is now connecting people with very niche, like super niche interests that were never connected before. Again, it would have been just two ships in the night just passing each other. But the internet is now connecting these communities that once were never connected. And so when you can, a niche community in, let's say, California, when you combine that niche community with like other ones that are spread out all over the country and all over the world, you don't feel so small anymore. It's because before you're just physically low. There wasn't the internet and you were just like, all right, I have my biotech community.
If you're not in SF, Berkeley. You don't do startups.
Yeah, that's exactly it. If you're not in SF, you don't do startups. But that is not the case now, right? You can start a startup virtually anywhere, particularly if you're in software. That's even more like broad, right? But like now science is not just for me in my hometown in Berkeley, San Francisco. It is Texas, it is Seattle, Pacific Northwest. It's like literally just like you connect all these like kind of nodes, and when your niche is no longer niche, it's like actually a large community that has a niche focus. It starts to appeal to these large corporate folks. And again, we don't want, the goal of the podcast again is to put good out into the universe. And just so happens like where people are interested in furthering that mission of putting good out, good information. And that's what we're setting the filter at. If you're coming in, and look, I don't mean to use this advertiser I'm not trying to poo-poo on them, but it would feel very weird if Excedr had a MeUndies sponsor, right? An underwear sponsor for a biotech, right?
Dude, 100%.
Right.
It's not the goal.
Again, that wrong podcast. Like the wrong podcast. We want someone who's aligned with our mission and what at Excedr and aligned with the Biotech Startups podcast, such that they can further we can take it to the next level to put even more good out there. And if you're not about that, then probably you shouldn't sponsor. And again,
just think about the leverage it gives you. These companies, these are billion-dollar publicly traded companies that are now reaching out to you to try to develop that relationship. And all you've done, again, to your point, like you put out great stuff into the public, and you get it in front of your audience that would find it interesting. They turn into inbound leads for your company. And simultaneously, you start to get inbound from people that are trying to do marketing partnerships. That is, the espresso version of what we've been talking about for the last, whatever it is, 40 minutes. And I think that's just like insane when you think about what that does, what that means.
Again, we had no expectations from the outset. But I think this is the movement, right? Like now I'm starting to comment just broadly marketing wise. This is the movement. I honestly think people have like their tolerance for fakeness and bullshit and like transactional, I gotcha kind of stuff near zero. Nobody has time or the interest or wherewithal for it anymore. We've just been bludgeoned as people by that for so long. There's a reason why Netflix is doing so well and traditional television is not. Right? It's like, we want what we want. We want to watch the television show. I realize they did just roll out an ads platform or an ads level, but primarily the value proposition was for Netflix was like, I want this now. I want exactly what I want on demand anywhere, right? Versus before, now I'm starting to reminisce on this, was like, all right, I got this weekly show where I'm like, I don't have any say on what I'm watching. It's just whatever's on television, I guess I'm watching that. And then I guess whatever ads are inserted in there, I guess I'm also watching that. And that's annoying. And the television show is now 15 minutes of actual content and the rest is filler.
Yeah.
And we want to avoid that because everyone is tired of that. And that's why I'm so selective. I'm being so selective on who gets to participate as a sponsor. I don't want to be that. I don't want to go back to that. It's where I'm getting force fed this piece of media and I'm getting force fed these ads and I don't even get to say what I want to watch. at any given time. I'm told what I need to
And
do.
it doesn't provide value to your audience, which the goal of this whole thing is to be a revenue generating activity. So it's the misincentive. Yeah. Anyway, we could go all day on this.
Yeah, super misaligned. By the way, I think it's just, and science is slower moving and rightfully, like, science is slower moving because you're putting things in your body and you're also handling very sensitive things. Like healthcare is very sensitive. Also, science is hard. So it's a slower moving, like the feedback loops are like way longer, right? And you're handling very deep, hard problems. So that kind of element it makes our community a little bit slower to adopt, excuse me. Rightfully so, because if we go back, like the Facebook idea of just move fast and break things, pretty bad when you're when you're trying to create a drug that you're going to eat and could cause very serious issues. So or you're injecting yourself or whatever it may be. So the science is like slower and a little bit more cautious and a little bit more. And the reason why I'm saying this is because with that, we've seen other industries move far faster and do new things and adopt new things. But what we've seen, us at Excedr and myself being inspired by what is going on the outside of science, we're like, we can take the good of what's going on in other industries and let's incorporate it and bring it home. Let's bring it home to the sciences without having to do bring the bad. Let's just cherry pick the good and bring the good here. And I think that's another aspect too, is like for anyone who's maybe considering starting a podcast, marketing initiatives, whatever, like finding inspiration from other industries. I think it's super, super massive and being generally curious and also like
about how these other places are doing it. I think that insight is so like powerful. Like half the time, like it's like taking something that's worked in another place and just remixing it so that it works within your category, right?
You have to make it relevant for whatever niche that you're in. But here's another thing too, like, in order to create good content just pretty much good content, you must also consume a lot of content.
Yeah. In your category and see what you like and dislike. Yeah.
Yes. And even outside of your own space, right? Because you need to develop a taste. That's the part. This isn't a thing where you just, I want everyone, whoever may listen to this, I think another part of there's authenticity, but there's also just like getting inspo from other industries and other forms of content and developing a taste for yourself, like good taste. And the only way you can get good taste or develop your taste is to consume, right? It's like you gotta listen. You can't like be a good food critic if you barely eat food.
Yeah, totally.
That's right. You can't
totally.
You can't know good music until you've listened to a lot of good and bad music, right? It's like the taste is like something, and there's no shortcut to that. There's no shortcut. Like to develop the taste takes time and it takes a lot of consumption. And that's something too, is that I want to just say there are no shortcuts to that. Like you have to develop your own taste and your own perspective. And a lot of that just comes from, and here's an example. I listen to a crap ton of podcasts. I don't care. I listen to true crime. I listen to comedy. I listen to like mainstream media, NPR, New York Times. I listen to everything, finance, banking, macro econ. I listen to just like YouTube creators, just so on and so forth, like literally. And it doesn't feel like work to me because it's fun. And it's also, I'm learning a lot from them. Like you can learn a lot from other industries too.
Yeah, so apply that in your own.
I was like, that's cool. That's not so cool. That's cool. That's not so cool. Hold all the cool parts and then try to put it and remix it into something that we could call the Biotech Startups podcast or call it Excedr. Yeah.
And that your audience would have an interest in. Dude, 100%. All right, just to change pace, because I know we don't want to go too long on this. I don't want to take up a ton of your time.
So Joe Rogan it for that's
the problem with all of this always. Talk to me about the financing side. So can you give me like an example of like interesting financing that you've seen companies do in your world? Like just combinations of things together. And maybe like we do three of these different combinations and we can double click down on the stuff that comes out or from that. Does that sound good?
Totally.
That's awesome.
And
sweet.
So maybe the first one, it's like, and this is maybe an overused description, but like platform technologies, basically normal drug discovery, you usually invest in one drug candidate and you move it through the pipeline and then you pray that the FDA approves it, get through the clinical trials. And now with the kind of like advent of the ability to have more like AI, ML, other kind of like modalities in science that instead of just having to bank on one candidate, you now can get multiple shots on goal because you're like, we have this unique approach and it can be applied to cancer, diabetes, so on and so forth, a multitude of things. It's the approach that is now the platform. And
so, interesting. So the technology is really the approach that they're building. So yes. It's like, okay, interesting.
Exactly. Or so someone has a proprietary, again, I'm not the MIML person, but like they have that proprietary AI/ML and like they can generate leads, just like fire them out. And instead of just banking on one, they can fire out 6 and you have more shots on goal. Okay. Now, the reason why I tell you this is because companies nowadays, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have one candidate that you want to keep in-house and own, and you want that to be your main drug candidate. Now, these other shots on goal can be sold off to other people who may want it. They can be, big pharma can collaborate and help. You have to work out the royalty deals, but you can be like, if you fund the clinical trials, we'll give you X% of royalty should this thing get closed. You can work out milestone payments. If it hits clinical, if the animal studies look like this, if phase 1 looks like this, if phase 2 looks like this, if phase 3 looks like this, you're going to pay us 10 million, 20
it's
million.
It's almost like
100.
Spinning out little businesses from that business. So
from the platform technology, starting from there. That didn't used to be a thing. Now, if you think about it from that perspective, we can keep the lights on, like we can bang out 6 candidates. One of them we want to keep. Other 5, we're going to find ways to partner with other people, sell them, whatever. That's one way.
So how would they do that? Would they raise grant money for that initial platform building, or would they raise venture capital and then sell those out?
Yeah. So that in our world, a lot of the science comes out of the academic institutions. Okay. So you would need to.
Do they have ownership of what they end up creating?
Yeah. So that's crazy. And so this is part of the talking. This is like very much like navel gazing for the science field, but like people might not know this. Most research universities have something they call tech transfer. These are offices where if there's a piece of IP living in, I don't know, UC Berkeley, they basically, if you're the professor that invented the technology or the postdoc or whoever it may be, you need to go through the tech transfer office and you have to cut a deal with the university in order for that IP to go and live in the for-profit world.
Super interesting.
And once you do that tech transfer, and a little bit before, during, and after, you can finance it in different ways. You can do grant funding.
Would the university own a percentage of that future company, or it's like a right to revenues? So you can structure these deals in any way.
You can structure them in every university.
But the large biotech like universities, so the ones that we got in Boston, the ones that we got out in the Bay Area, like how were they thinking about it? What are they doing for, you're spinning this tech out?
So it depends. It's so different across every university. Some of them think like businesses, to be quite honest. Really? There are some northeastern universities out there.
Yeah, they're looking at this as we're going to get paid and this is going to go into our endowment for the next 200 years.
Yes, exactly. But you'd be surprised where that money goes. There's a whole apparatus for that. West Coast, like Stanford has a very like reasonable tech transfer office. And that's why so many startups come out of Stanford.
Biotech startups in particular.
Startups. Like
yeah.
Stanford's tech transfer office is very
they're low tech. No, that makes sense.
But they're very like the Silicon Valley is like in the heart of it, right? Yep. They were the ones who fostered that kind of like culture. And so there's a much more like favorable kind of tech transfer culture there. And every university is different.
Okay. So you spun this company out and you're like, all right, I got to go raise funding. I built this platform. What are they doing? What are you seeing people do? First off, what are they doing traditionally? And what are you starting to see people do that you think is way more interesting and a better idea for these funding opportunities?
Yeah. Go back 15 years ago. It was usually the tech transfer process was far less sophisticated. And oftentimes the founder would get cut a brutal deal, like a truly brutal deal. And then what you would do is you'd appeal to venture capital, who would also cut you a super brutal deal. Genentech, one of the first biotechs, was like funded by Schneider Perkins. It was based out of technology out of use that and others. But so anyone who's listening who knows the history, don't beat me up on. I'm trying to keep it succinct here. The terms of the deal back then and the way you did it was very different. You tech transfer it out, it was hard raising that first bunch of venture capital. They take a bunch of your company and then you go. You sign a big lease on a big space and then you just have to figure it out. Now, like You can do a combination of grants. You can do services, right? So like you can do a fee for service, like with your platform. You can like partner with other people and they'll pay you like to do research. There's now other people who are in the realm outside of venture capital. Academic institutions now invest themselves. You have big corporates like the Pfizers of the world. They will invest in you. Cs will also invest in you. Bill and Melinda Gates will also invest in you, like non-dilutively. And then you can also lease with us, right? Like we can now get you equipment without having to cut an equity check. And this is where we're at now. There's way more tool sets. And one of our guests, Steve Visco, he's like the second guest on our podcast. He spun his company out of Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. He was the first company to spin out Lawrence Berkeley, right? This is like a massive storied institution. And he actually did it pretty scrappy. They were doing a bunch of licensing deals. They created a bunch of IP and licensed it out for other people to use. And that's how they brought in money, non-dilutively.
Interesting. So
there's
biotech is so much more creative with this. Like when you look at software, it's either you're bootstrapping or you're raising a huge round. It feels like the only path that people really talk about. And I don't know. It's just very interesting to think about. We're just going to run a good company and go find customers for this thing. That's like crazy idea, but
and if you can have a little like, again, it's like just being willing to ask yourself, why has this been done this way? And just peel back a layer or two. You'll see that the status quo may not actually be the status quo for any real reason outside of just like, it's been done like this, right? Outside of just like inertia, like you can find creative ways to do it. Truly. Like, and that's what I want to encourage everyone. And this is just purely on the financing side, right? I encourage everyone to think critically about their processes and ask themselves, why are we doing it this way? And should we continue doing it this way? However, there are times when you peel back the layer and you're like, I see why you do it this way. Leave it. That works, right? Don't fix what isn't broken. But if you're like encountering a business issue, finance, science, or otherwise, ask yourself why. Peel back a couple layers. And if you look at it and you just use your common sense, you're like, it doesn't have to be done this way. Do it the other way. No one's stopping you. Like it's your, like as a entrepreneur or whatever, in whatever shape or form, entrepreneur, like you can do it a different way and you can redefine the way it's always been done. No one's really stopping you.
Yeah. I think this is really interesting. This idea of this like platform technology that's ML or AI or whatever it ends up being. Like, I feel like that's what's happening with these base models where it's like, cool, we built this base model and we're now selling like access to it in some form. Mm-hmm. And it feels like everything is going to this direction where it's like, oh, I have this team of researchers that are in the biotech space and it's 10 people on this team. They built this platform, which is just this model that can YOLO out all of these different drug variations, right? And like they're selling basically access to the outputs that come from that thing that they created. It's just a really interesting, like larger
it's amazing
movement that's
quite
happening.
Honest. It's amazing because, and look, it's very early days. I'm not saying anything that AI and ML spits out is ready for the clinic and like ready for human consumption. I'm not saying that.
It's still a lead, right? If I have 6 at bats, I was talking to my friend like 2 weeks or about a week and a half ago, and he's in the music space and they're starting to release EPs. It's like a way different, because for them it's, we're just trying to create viral moment opportunities. So he said this because he's a big baseball fan, and I thought it was really like good way to think about it. Even if you have one of the best batting averages, whatever, we'll say like you bat like a 400, right? That still means if you only have 2 at bats, the likelihood that you're actually going to get on base is still low. So in contrast, like if I can get 10 at bats, like I'm for sure going to get on base. And it's the same idea here. Like these companies, I feel like that's how they're thinking about it. And this is how I'm starting to think about it more and more too, is like, how do we just create as many at-bats as possible with all this?
That's exactly it. And again, AI/ML in the sciences isn't going to solve all ills, but it's definitely a market improvement over the previous status quo of you just hope to God that this one asset is going to go all the way through and that you did enough fortune telling that you can like make this happen. And signs that we're tackling in the sciences are far harder than, for example, like when early stuff, like an early antimicrobial or just like an antibiotic, easier science than Alzheimer's. Straight up, way more complex. You're like trying to solve things in the brain. And you can imagine that the amount of work and complexity that goes into it, it's just, God, the idea here is with AI ML is that we can, instead of just banking and just hoping this one drug to a very complex problem works itself out and just praying, it's okay, exactly what you said. Let's get at bat way more, like way more to increase the likelihood. Yes, there's still going to be failures. I'm not saying that everyone's going to be a success now. There's going to be a ton of failures, but within those failures, we're hoping there's a kernel of just like a winner. And you get there. That's the kind of platform mentality, really.
Yeah. I think I just think about this for founders too, right? It's whatever you're building, there's all these different ways. Like we traditionally would call them pivots, but it's, for example, we're building Swell, right? And I'm seeing suddenly, and just in the last couple of months, oh, here's all these other companies that we could use the same technology for that we can spin out for at bats. So there's all of the, and what does that mean? Like okay, so then do you have, just to throw out like for people that are listening, say you raise venture and you're like, all right, can I spin out this other thing and then have a team work on this idea using the same base technology and like what almost you could create this like venture studio within your own company. And hearing this platform thing, it almost feels like that. Like it's that idea can be expanded there. So
that's exactly it. The whole platform technology kind of vernacular, like that it's everywhere. It's not specific to science, right? They're like platform.
Totally.
They aided the platform technology, right?
Totally.
It's just, we have this approach to cloud compute or like to compute rather than being on-prem, we're being in the cloud. Yeah. You know who else wants to be in the cloud? Every business, like whether you're like Home Depot or you are a restaurant or you're Procter and Gamble, this technology platform has a benefit you can like leverage at scale.
Totally.
Same thing in the sciences, same thing with AI ML, right? It's just like we can use this like across the board. And I think it's a very exciting moment to be in. But also we need to like temper it. Like we're still in the early innings. Like things are still, it's a wild west in a lot of ways, but it's definitely progress. That's for sure.
Totally. This has been great, man. Thank you again for coming on. If people want to talk to you or see what you're doing, where can they find you? What's the best place to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So the best place to get a hold of me, honestly, is on LinkedIn.
Cool. Nice. Most active there.
Yeah. Just like
I'll add it to the show notes as well to make it easy for people. So
yeah, come shoot me a DM.
Love it, man.
Yeah, I'm available. We try to get back to you pretty quick. Give me a shout.
Awesome. Sweet. John, thank you again for coming on. We'll talk to you soon, brother.
Always a blast. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome.
Later.
Cheers.
See ya.